So then, we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find in the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage. So then, we can understand the time of the end as per Yeshayahu the prophet. We find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. As many people are not familiar with some of the words of the Hebraic culture, Messiah simply means then the sent one, or then the Saviour. As his holy cities then are returning, it is imperative these words then becoming familiar. At this time, nations are realizing the holy cities found then in Yeshayahu chapter 1:8 are the very cities of Revelation. So let's then make sure we understand the laws, the holy instructions of Moshe, or known as Moses. What went on in the desert? Simply the holy city started on a desert. Later would become the model for then the promised Saviour. Sounds very obvious. But some people, for some reason, they simply think those holy instructions were abolished. How can you abolish a set of instructions, whereas then the second tabernacle services are dependent from the first? Because only half of the instructions, half of the prophets were then completed. As we read then Revelation and understanding then the first menorah and the second menorah, then it is absolutely obvious. The city on a desert was the model, and then later, when the Messiah would do his part of the instructions, then they would go around forming holy cities around the world. Thus it was like this until 1009. Then the religious people, they invaded Jerusalem and then destroyed then the tomb from where the Messiah then came from. It was the first time ever. Jerusalem was then destroyed many times. But from the time of the Messiah, when he came from the dead, the place where he came from the dead until 1009 was intact. 1009 was then Jerusalem invaded and the tomb for the first time destroyed. Then came the time of the seat, no holy cities. Thus then the new world order. But let's evaluate then these from the enlightenment of Daniel, the 11th chapter. As we understand, then the leader of Great Britain, she's obviously visiting with the Pope. He's extremely busy at the moment. He's reorganizing the congregation because so many easy scoundrels, they have gorged themselves with the money of the organization and became absolutely scoundrels. So his agenda is very, in quote, tight. But truly, this truly is fine. Then the Prime Minister of Israel is visiting with the Secretary of State of the United States. Boy, that is a problem. The reunion of Gog and Magog. Let's then understand what comes out of this nest of snakes. Because absolutely nothing comes out of this relationship that is positive. There's always trouble everywhere. You find in the misuse of the Miltha with the destroyer himself. Scoundrels every time. But then let's evaluate what's going on based from Daniel the 11th chapter. People are aware of Gog and Magog is Israel, United States. So then we have our bearings properly when we make a map of the whole instructions. So then we have a path. As the past then is in front of us, then we have a future. But let's evaluate what's going on. The 11th chapter of Daniel, verse then from the 30 up to 32nd verse, you find a section related with the covenant. However, the translators of the Holy Instructions were not truly aware of the distinction of a covenant versus the abomination that makes desolate. Let's evaluate. Firstly then, the Hebrews of the time of the Messiah or the Saviour, a lot of them didn't believe him. Understandably, the Messiah himself said, and he was very straightforward, because they were so, in quote, hard. They want to earn a position as the Messiah was handling it, because the Messiah was then the Son of the Highest. Everybody wants then to be the Son of the Highest. But the problem was, the Messiah was the promised prophet, and the evidence was the completion of the spring feast. But the religious leaders were hard. Thus the Messiah said, prostitutes and thieves will earn then the kingdom of heaven before you. So let's evaluate what's going on in the world. Thus we find then the new system precisely as during the time of Daniel. Daniel worked under many kings, and the last, as we understand as far as Daniel the 11th chapter, was Darius the Mede. As he was then very profitable person in the government, he came up with a very precise and perfect system of his time. A system of credit. He would lend money, he would receive interest, and so on and so forth. And then he also was involved with the helping many companies of the time. Production of bricks, production of stones, of handling of them in quarries, and so on and so forth, because building was very important back then. And roads and ships, you name it. He was extremely influential. The known world at the time, they were always adopting the system of Daniel. Starting then with the king of Babylon, was the most influential pagan king of the time, because then the 70 years captivity because of the yearly Shabbat wasn't respected in holy instructions, so the people were kicked out of the land, so the land rested. Then Daniel came up with a new system. It was truly, absolutely exemplary system. And Daniel was receiving instructions regarding then the prophecies of the Gentiles, and then he was pondering how this system would work at the base of the statue, because Daniel was always comparing his own system with someone else's system. He knew he had the best system, but yet he was comparing it. As he received then the base of the statutes understandings, then he was then curious. If you were giving instructions related with a portion of the holy instructions, wouldn't you be interested in finding out how these nations would play out in the future? Of course you want. But then Daniel was already playing during his time what would be like in the future. During the time of the Messiah, when he was then directing the nations, they adopted the system of Daniel. The Messiah didn't change it. Why would he change a system that was already working? He simply directed them to do what Daniel taught. But then we find, during this time where nations then are coming out of the 1,000 years of deceit, and then they are aware of that there is a system coming from the east. But wait a minute. They do not want to be left out. They want a piece of the action in their own ways. So then let's find out what way is it. 32nd verse. Then you find, then the abomination that makes desolate, and the evildoers against the covenant. Then you find then the representatives of the covenant. So you are finding then a couple of covenants. You find the existing covenant of the first tabernacle service, singular. Then you find the second tabernacle services, during the time of the Messiah, obviously the Saviour. Then you find the time of deceit. But then this time, nations of influential background, they are trying then receive some sort of forward motion along with the action. It's already described, there is no news. You find then the false Messiah. You find Gog and Magog, Israel and then United States. You find then the covenant, the true covenant. Then you find the covenant completed. But what's going on then with the Gog and Magog? You find both of them are in trouble. The holy cities are returning and they have no space. Israel wants to build the third temple. Great news. They won't be building it. Then comes the scoundrels Saviour of their very own. So then what do they want out of the deal? Well, they want the best of both worlds, as they say. Firstly, they do not any responsibility as far as wanting a system of responsibility. They want to do whatever they want, as if they were living during the time of the deceit. That's the first topic. The second, they don't want any restrictions. Thirdly, then, they find themselves in a position where they must make a decision, so then they can become part of the new system. China then is coming with it. But then let's read the 32nd verse, because it speaks of the desolation, the abomination that makes desolate. Israel is trying then to come up with the Levitical system. They are teaching then the Levitical priests of going through the rituals and so on and so forth. As you read the instructions from the 5 Megillas of Moshe, you find then the priests over there performing those kinds of actions in the Holy Temple. Do you know that these are very bad? They are playing with the desolation. Those practices were already completed. But the sacrificial system, they are trying to return with it. Thus the desolation. But let's then go further with it. As we read once again, then it speaks of the profane, the sanctuary. The sanctuary in this tone is related with the first tabernacle service. Tabernacling as a whole then is profaned. Why do we have to link these with Revelation? Because Revelation is the completion. We are during the time of the second menorah. We can't return to the first menorah. We are in the second because the first was completed. Israel, however, because they have scoundrels, leaders of this covenant, it is truly false covenant. But this is what then they want becoming then leaders of. The 32nd verse speaks of then people with their mouths working like flaps, flap around the mouth. This truly is the tone of this understanding. It is then restarting then this system and makes the whole a scoundrel situation. Thus they make an abomination of what was holy, completed for the second. First the holy city and the land of Cush, as per the instruction of the prophet. Where do we find the updates? In Hebrews. But there are no more sacrifices. But Israel at the present moment is teaching the Levitical priests then of doing precisely what they should not be doing. What they do is an abomination. But they want some sort of a power, and Gog and Magog, they are talking, and scoundrels. These leaders, they simply don't learn. What does it take to stick this in their freaking heads? Then later comes the 34th, and then the exile, the spoil, and the stumbling. The stumbling part of it is precisely then what Israel should be teaching, the second tabernacle services. So then you find on one side, properly then, the Lady of Great Britain, then obviously conversing with the Pope, very busy, of becoming an example for his congregation. Taken care of must be taken care of. And then the Gog and Magog duel, then talking junk. They want some sort of a religion out of force of some sort of a control over China, and they can't be under the control. The amazing part of it, the Prime Minister of Israel has Yah in his name and he doesn't understand the instructions. And they visit and playing around and, pats on the back and, hugs around and smiles and, oh boy. And then the 35th verse speaks of a hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is not an Hebrew word. It comes from hypocrite, those kinds of masks that the Greco theaters used to use many years ago. They're posing something they are not for a certain outcome where we already know then is the abomination that makes desolate. Israel wants a third temple. The United States is trying to manipulate to get it. The problem is there won't be a third temple. The Messiah said not a stone is going to be left upon another and the temple won't be rebuilt. Where must be on Mount Moriah is the tent of the desert during the time of Moses. Not above, not below. And at some point, the Arab people will let, when the time comes. But then reevaluating what's going on, you already find nations then lining up themselves so then they can relearn what Daniel has taught. And thus far we have no religion involved with the system. Then you find in the 30th verse of the 11th chapter, then the ships returning. These ships is directly related with a reflection of the time of Daniel and the ships of the United States. At some point, the United States will be retrieved then from the world's in quote arena, but furiously. We are studying reflections of what already went on. You find Daniel, you find the nation of China, you find the nation of the northern kingdom, you find then the southern kingdom, you find in the relationship of the Gentile Netzer, and then goes on and so forth. You find the influence of the precision, the Dragonic period. Then you find in sections of the covenant, the first covenant. You find in sections of the deceit. You find in the alien god related with the dragon, precision. Then later you find then the relationship of Gog and Magog. Then you find the covenant and the religious leaders of those systems of old, of the first tabernacle service of the temple, trying to manipulate, then trying to rebuild the third temple. Then you find Gog and Magog again talking, and then the first covenant and the second covenant, and making it, trying to make it work, and it doesn't work. But since we understand the third temple won't be built, what do we expect of Israel? What prophet Yeshayahu already said. The first city on the land of Cush, that's where Yohanan, the Shaliach, or then the apostle, was at because of the persecution of the land. That's where he ended up. There was an order from the angel, then you must come out of the holy city and prophesy again. Where was he prophesying? Was it on the land of Cush? No, they were learning tabernacling. Yohanan was very far away. Where did he go? He went north. He confronted those people where the Messiah confronted them. Then he ended up on the island of Patmos. That's where then the leader over there, the Roman leader, Domitian, sentenced him because he was deadly afraid of Yohanan. Domitian thought he would then come over to his throne and take over his place, because this is how they believed back then. Spiritual powers where they couldn't come against it. But Yohanan was not interested in Gentile leadership. He was interested in tabernacling. So from then on, then he went to Patmos. From there were no Megillas or then writings coming out of it. There was not a boat over there, oh, Megillah delivery. So as the world then is lining up for the new system, and quote new, during this time of the restoration period, for many people is new because they never learned. But from the instructions perspective is a simply reflection. As nations are lining up themselves then, waiting for China's system so they can do trade via computer and investments and receiving and sending money and parcels, and merchants of the earth becoming more influential, ports, airports being updated. Then you find Gog and Magog turning around and trying to make schemes, and Daniel already explained of these scoundrels. 500 years before the birth of the Saviour himself, Daniel already warned. Be sure you understand these scoundrels, because Daniel 32nd, 33rd, 35th, he explains in very many details. As you do not have to have a revelation in quote to understand in the autumn feast, because you find in Leviticus and then the prophets already explained. The Messiah himself simply directed towards the understanding of those layers. Try to remind yourself, not a layer of the prophets must be left undone. So he had gathered those layers and pointed the people back. So we understand what Gog and Magog, they are scheming around. Later on I'm going to speak more of this salvation situation, but can be sure of it, the time is for China making more deals around the world, so then people can be linked up with the new system so they can work. As then we read the abomination that makes desolate, so people are more prepared for what's coming. Please stay tuned, much more coming up.